Well, good evening, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope blog and podcast. And I'm really excited today. I'm speaking with Gene Back. Some of you may be familiar with the name, some of you may be more familiar with his music. He actually did the soundtrack for Cabrini, which is a recent film that came out by Angel Studios, that was telling the story of a nun, a true story of an Italian nun who actually did a bunch of charitable acts for orphans in New York and ended up traveling the world, basically starting her own missionary society, just a really interesting and inspiring female figure in the 1800s. And Jean actually did the soundtrack for that. Um, Jean, I kind of to start out, I wanted to ask you what scene from the film did you find the hardest to put music to? Because I know when I've talked to other musicians, they'll say that there are specific scenes where maybe it's the actor or it's the character, and there's subtleties in their facial features as well as in what's going on. And so it's not so easy to just have a single type of theme. It has to be more complex. Was there a scene in the film that you found really hard to compose?
Oh wow. I think there were a bunch of scenes, it's a complex story and a lot of
Yeah.
complex emotions going on throughout the story. And I think one scene that comes to mind is when there's this New York Times story and this kind of like a voiceover of the reporter Calloway. He's Cabrini's friend. He's a reporter for the New York Times, and he's talking about how um, rats have it better,
Yeah.
in 5 points. And so it's this whole sequence that talks that follows Calloway visiting 5 points, going underground, of him reporting on his experience, in the sewers, and then seeing Cabrini's work and with the children, um and it being a call to action uh to Americans reading that, hey, like, let's help these folks out. Rats have it better than these poor kids in 5 points. And so that scene was challenging in that with any montage, you got to hit all the beats, in its
Yeah.
progression. Uh, and sometimes it can hit all of the emotional beats without sounding abrupt or kind of like choppy even. It has to make the montage not feel longer than it actually is. You want it to feel like a journey. You want it to feel organic. And I remember when the director and I were working on that sequence that, while I was working on it, I was getting specific emotional peaks and climaxes, but it just wasn't it was too much. I would
Okay.
find myself constantly running into like it's just too much, because the scene is emotional enough as it is,
Hmm.
that the aha moment came when the director Alejandro was like, look, this needs to feel kind of more almost meditative and fluid
Hmm.
rather than like hitting all like scoring like every single emotion that's going on in this sequence. And that completely changed everything. I was like really
Hmm.
fighting with this sequence. Once I realized, oh my goodness, like this has to not feel so structured. That
Hmm.
once we took away structure and let it just flow and be emotional and you know allow the viola, which is, I'm playing the viola and the solo during that sequence,
Yeah.
just find its way instead of being really calculated or
Mm.
deliberate about hitting a specific, frame or something. Of course, there are definitely beats that we're hitting.
Yeah.
Um, but that was definitely a challenge. But
Mm.
I love a good challenge. So when I get stuck, I don't necessarily get defeated by it. It's like a puzzle. I'm a big crossword puzzle guy. So whenever I get stuck on something, it's actually it inspires me to think deeper and then figure it out. And it's always and that was so rewarding. That's actually a piece that comes back during the ending credits. It actually
Yeah.
finishes out the movie and the ending credits. That was kind of a long answer, but that one came to mind right away when you're talking about a challenging scene.
Do you enjoy actually being a musician with the music you've written? Like, actually, because you were mentioning you playing the viola. So you're doing both. You did the composing and now you're kind of bringing it to fruition yourself by playing it. Um, do you enjoy that, or do you like to actually hear it from someone else that you've written and
Mhm.
critique it that way?
Yeah, I do enjoy it. It's a big part of my process to make sure that my unique voice is being heard,
Mm-hmm.
and that's represented by my fingers, by my tone, my body. Um, and there is a uniqueness in that, which, honestly, I wasn't always super comfortable with uh, for a bit because
Mm.
I'm not I'm not a soloist, solo classical performer. Of course I studied classically, but that I was self-conscious about, really putting my playing out there. But especially with a big movie score, because like we had Ennio Morricone's record the score. These are some of the best players in the world. Why shouldn't the concertmaster of that orchestra or the section leader of the viola section play that solo? Versus me, I'm not in that orchestra. I don't play in an orchestra. But I have come to terms and have made peace with the fact that like my playing unique to me, and I know that that's how I express myself
Mm.
artistically, and that will be the truest form of what it is that I want to communicate artistically. And I have always, since I was a kid, have played on my own material.
Mm.
And as I, developed as a composer into the visual media space, out of sheer necessity, I would record myself, because it was the fastest, most efficient, and most economical way to get a piece out the door.
Yeah.
I don't, any artist or composer will tell you that they're not always going to have an orchestra budget. In fact, for the most part, especially in independent film, that's not the case. So I really leaned on my multi-instrumental background throughout
Mm.
my career. Um, to create my own voice and music that is really unique to me. Uh, and that, I really don't feel like another player would have been able to play that viola solo and the way that I play it. And same thing goes with the violin solos in the soundtrack. I played all those violin solos too.
Mm.
Um, and so yeah, I do get joy from it. Now I do because I found the confidence within myself to say, you know what? I may not be Paganini or, I may not be, the top soloist out there, touring and just doing that and playing Bach flawlessly or whatever, right? But I know that I have my own special tone and I have, come to now really appreciate that and I enjoy as you asked.
Is it stressful for you being a visual artist composer?
Um, I think like any artist, it's especially these days, no matter what, it's really difficult to quote unquote make a living, you know, being an artist. Um, and so, it's a couple things here, right? There's the making a living out of it, and then there's the actual, doing it as a profession and the pressures that come along with that. And so I guess when it comes to the stress of making a living out of it, I think um, I am very privileged to be able to make quote unquote a living, out of this profession. I had no idea that this was actually what I was going to do growing up. Um, and so I consider myself to be extremely lucky that I can even get a gig to begin with. At any time I get the opportunity to work with creative person and then get paid for it, no
Yeah.
matter what, each time it's like, wow, that is really cool, And I never take it for granted. Um,
But
of
did
course,
you
like
like
any
how
artist
long was
working
it?
in,
Oh, I was just gonna say, how long was it though until you got to that point? Because you must have started out where it was more difficult than now.
absolutely. I started from zero when I entered the visual media space. Before I did film composing, I played in bands. I was a session player in New York, and I toured, and I did that whole live music thing. In fact, that was really what I thought I was going to be doing.
Hmm.
But I realized that wasn't exactly sustainable because touring is really tough. And especially for someone who really loves being home, like myself, and it's the reason why I even explored this whole world of composing for visual media because, it seemed like a way that I could continue making music and also get paid for it. Of course, no idea what that was gonna look like, but I was lucky enough to, get my start in making music for ads, and that
Hmm.
really happened by accident. I had no idea what I was doing when I started doing that, so there was a tremendous amount of pressure, It's like you go into something, somebody asks you or gives you an opportunity, like, can you do this and can you do it tomorrow? You know, you just got to go for it. And ever since that moment, I just kept on building and building and hustling and, you know, making more contacts and networking. And some years were really, really tough. Some years were amazing. And it's just always going it continues to have its ups and downs. I mean, we're just coming from the biggest strike, you know, in the entertainment world,
Yeah.
in history. And so that was a tough time, and we're still feeling the effects of those months in which work stopped.
What
So
did you do during that time?
yeah, well, I mean, I was very lucky enough to continue working on documentaries. So,
Okay.
the strike really impacted actors, and of course, it was the actors and writers, but it did not impact the documentary space, which is something I also compose for. So I was actually kind of one of the lucky ones that could continue at least composing for docs. Um, and so, again, even then, it's tough. It's really tough, and sometimes you really gotta scale back on things. Uh, Sometimes you get lucky, you know, and And yeah, so uh, all this is to say, it's a constant journey. You know, like you might see me having composed Cabrini, but that was years in the making. You know, like I spent an entire year working on that score, and so it's hard work and it's a long game. It's a total long game. It's just staying the course um, and having support, from your friends and family. That's everything. That's how I can even get to this point and be speaking to you about all this.
Is there, what do you think's the hardest thing personally about being a musician? Do you find something in your personal life can be really negatively affected by it?
Sure, I think what's tough is the monetization of your creativity,
Hmm.
right? Because when your work as a creative is being monetized, or when it's, sold, or when you're hired to create something, um, it's there can sometimes be, how do I say this? Um, Difficulty in like understanding that your worth is not based off of how much somebody is paying you for something,
Okay.
especially, when it comes to your art. That your worth is not based off of what somebody else thinks you're worth.
Hmm.
That the challenge comes from really understanding that your worth as an artist comes from within, and that you yourself um, must understand that somebody else's opinion or what dollar sign they throw at you for your work does not determine how good you are as an
Hmm.
artist.
Hmm.
But there's a conflict because you're trying to make a living as an artist. And so,
Yeah.
you start to then sometimes think, well, oh, am I good enough because, that other person got the gig or something, but that is complete nonsense. There's so many elements that come into play when somebody gets a job or doesn't get a job, especially in film music.
Hmm.
It rarely has anything to do with how good you are, which you would think, would be the opposite. Um,
Hmm.
you could be the best composer in the world and you don't get the gig. And there's a number of
Why?
reasons for that.
Yeah, I was gonna say why. Is it
Uh,
mostly like connections, like who you know, or
it's connections, it's who you know, there's politics, there's favoritism, there's um, ways of doing things, there's all sorts of things that come into play that have nothing to do with the actual talent itself, you
hmm.
know, um, and that may be surprising for a lot of folks, but I don't think it's exclusive to music. I think a lot of
Yeah.
industries, work like that, right? And so, uh, but bottom line, it's just knowing what you're worth, and knowing when to walk away from something
Hmm.
because you know that that's not really what you're worth,
Yeah.
even though it might be another gig. But then that might mean you make a little less,
Yeah.
that year. That's tough. It's really, really hard to manage that, no doubt.
When
But
did you confront a situation like that before that really impressed itself upon you to learn that? Or is that just something you've come to see over the years with the different gigs you've done?
As I mentioned before, I cut my teeth, on ad music and composing for ads. And actually, that was really kind of an incredible way to learn how to deal with disappointment.
Yeah.
Because the you're cranking out music like every day, and you're competing against dozens of other composers for one, you know, campaign.
Yeah.
And there is no rhyme or reason why something gets chosen in the end. You could even be you could be the choice, right?
Yeah.
Your music could be the one that was chosen. And then for some reason, at the very last minute, it went to something else. And after years of going through that, on a daily basis, you kind of learn to like not take it personally.
Yeah.
If you don't get chosen, you don't get the gig, okay. Well, then you just move on to the next thing.
Mm.
It can get sensitive for, especially artists when you get rejected. I mean, who likes to get rejected? Nobody. But I think I was fortunate to have the experience of learning, especially in the ad space, to not take negative feedback or rejection personally, because it really has nothing to do with you.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, I've not heard that before. I mean, I think too you have this unique perspective being from doing the ad space before. Um, is there a film or movie you wish you could do? Like if you could just pick a film or a movie you could star in, what do your music could star in, what would you pick, you think?
I would love to do like a beautiful romance.
Really? Wow.
I am an emotional. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm an emotional person. I love very emotional music. And I think you could hear some of that in
Oh
the
yeah.
Cabrini score. You know, yeah, and doing a music for a story about like a kind of like The Notebook or something, right? That's one of I love
Yeah.
that movie just because it's it's just one of the most romantic, beautiful movies ever, and it makes me cry, like thinking about it. Um, Making a theme that just really represents, a beautiful love, or, a love lost or something that, I feel like I could really, you know, um, really go for and enjoy, as a process. Um, but then on the other hand, an action movie, um, finding a way to write music, um, in an action movie that does something a little different, that
Yeah.
isn't just like your kind of what you would hear all the time in an action movie. I always want to push a genre and do something different with
Yeah.
a genre or form, push the form in some way. And so I think that would be tremendously fun. I've done a lot of dramatic stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
mhm. And and even a little bit of like kind of like dramedies. I also really love doing dramedies. I think you can get really interesting, with dramedies. Um, but anyway, yeah, a romance. That would be really fun to do.
That's interesting. What do you think makes for a good love story? Like, is there, because there are love stories you watch that are like, this is really sappy and terrible. And then
Hmm.
there are other love stories that you're just like, that pull your heartstrings because of the hardship and the beauty that kind of combine together. But what do you find makes for a good love story?
I think
Excuse me.
for me, oh, bless you. When there's a love story that involves two people um who for whatever reason uh, can't find each other right away or be together right away
Mm.
because of external societal factors.
Huh.
Um, I think every great love story has had some sort of conflict that was completely outside of the relationship between two people. I mean, look at Romeo and Juliet. These two families, it was about the families that hated each other. The
Yeah.
Montagues and Capulets, they were rivals.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with Romeo and Juliet. In fact, if those two families didn't even weren't rivals, maybe it would have been okay in the end.
Yeah, and there'd been no story.
Yeah.
But it changed.
But yeah, o- or a story with two people that come from different backgrounds or whatever, and can't be together, and then eventually do find each other. Um, I it's like both the tragedy and the joy that comes from overcoming the tragedy. And sometimes it maybe doesn't get resolved. And then you're just like, oh no, but it could have
Yeah.
happened. Past Lives is a great example of that. I don't know if you've seen that film.
Past lives? I don't
Hmm.
know if I have. When was it made?
It's really recent.
Oh,
Yeah, I strongly recommend it.
who's in it?
Greta Lee,
Okay.
and I forgot the male actor. But it's a beautiful story. These two Korean um protagonists, and I don't want to spoil too much of it.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah, but it's a really beautiful story, love story, and yeah, there's as the title suggests, you might get a sense of how what kind of love story this would be. Um,
Wow. Huh. I'm gonna look that up. I wanted to ask you because you were talking about Korean dramas for a second. Have you ever seen House of Flying Dragons?
oh, a long time ago.
The music from that's really cool. I think I think one of them's called Lovers, the instrumental piece, and
Hmm.
it's a very sad ending, but I was just thinking of that it's really cool. That's a good one too. But I'm gonna have to look up the one you mentioned because I've not heard of it. Do you know if it's on Netflix or anything, or is it like a certain streaming service that has it?
I'm pretty sure it's streaming. The director is Celine Song.
Okay.
It was nominated for best film and screenplay. I believe that's right.
For the
At
Oscars?
the Oscars.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All
Hmm.
right. No, I need to
Yep.
look it
It
up.
was nominated for Best Original Screenplay and Best Picture. Um, A24 released the film. Yeah, beautiful film. I highly recommend it. Good love story. That would have been a great film to score.
Do you like are you personally married or have, close family? Like where do you get that support you were mentioning earlier from friends and family?
Yes. I am married. And my wife has been such a tremendous rock, especially through, these turbulent times in our industry. And she works in the industry too. And so
Okay.
to have that emotional support system, let alone the financial and all of that is just I can't even begin to tell you how important that is for me, to have that kind of partnership in which um there is just such creative uh support as well.
Yeah.
She's during Cabrini, she'd be up with me, those crazy nights, 3 in the morning, just to be there and let me know I'm not alone, because it's a very lonely, thing to do when you're scoring a film, especially a really big film with a lot of music. And so without that, I really, I don't, without her, I don't know what I would have done. I really give so much um, credit um, to her, for getting me through some of my toughest times, professionally and personally. And so to have that kind of a support system on top of, you know, both of our families um, is I can't tell you enough how important that is for me and how much that means to me.
But it seems, even in films, and please correct me because I'm guessing, I mean, you know a lot of people, similar musicians and people in the entertainment industry, but it seems like everyone's family life and support systems are so short lived. Something happens or they're not there anymore, or it's a new person. And it seems like, I'm even thinking now of there's that musical, I don't remember the name, it's missing me, but there's that song Finishing the Hat from that musical. And it's just talking about how artists are always alone. And the people that they always want to be there are gone and not in their lives anymore because they made them go away. And so there's this love hate relationship of I love my music, but I love it so much that the people around me can't stick around because there's not enough love to give them. Like, have you personally experienced that yourself or with um, other people in your career? Why do you think that is? Like, is there a way to balance that, or is it kind of, a doomed thing that artists are just supposed to be alone and not be able to have a fruitful family life at the same time as they're trying to make a really fruitful music life?
Yeah, no, it is a very interesting thing. It's I think it's really difficult for um the average person to understand what an artist goes through, in their journey. I don't believe that artists are doomed to be alone. Do I think it's very difficult to somebody else as an artist who really understands you from a creative and emotional perspective? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, I know I have experienced that in my personal, for sure, no doubt. Um, my wife Courtney is just incredible in that she does get my emotional and creative perspective through and through. So that when I do hit my lows, it's okay. It's okay to hit your lows. You know, it's easy to celebrate the high,
Yeah.
but when you reach those insecurities, when you reach those places of doubt, self-doubt, that's when the true colors really come out.
Yeah.
And it requires a tremendous amount of emotional maturity in another person, whether it be a friend or a partner, um, family member, to go through it with you and not make you feel worse about yourself. Um, and uh, and so I don't think artists are doomed, but I do think it does require a lot of deep understanding for the creative process and the emotions that come from that. because it's not like any normal job. You know, a great film that represents this is called The Phantom Thread. P.T.
Yeah.
Anderson. I don't know if you've seen that yet. You know, that movie is really, it really captures perfectly the different seasons, so to speak, of an artist's journey. You know, you could be on top of the world and you might be the best in the business, but then you still might feel the depths of despair and self-doubt too. It's inevitable. Yeah, and I really mean that. It's going to happen. But you come back up from it. And then the like the seasons, it just cycles through and you just need to weather it. And not everybody really understands that. In fact, I think, you know, m most people that I, you know, not most, but a lot of people in my life haven't really understood that journey and what it takes to nurture that journey. May sound selfish, you know, but that's not what I'm saying here. Is that oh, it's just all got to be about me, 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 me. But you know, it's this is not like a normal job.
Yeah.
So a quote unquote normal job here, you know, the creative peaks and valleys are real. You know, it's you can't just be operating at a 10 out of 10 all the time. It just doesn't work
Right.
that way.
Has there ever been a time when you feel you weathered a low badly?
Oh, yes. Definitely. You know, I have gone through a number of things in my life, but you know, I have been through like a full-blown existential crisis, you know, really hitting some lows in which I wasn't sure how I was going to get out of, you know, but again, with the support system that I have been so fortunate to have, you know, I'm here now. And
Yeah.
I really believe in growing from those experiences, you know,
Yeah.
not letting those, you know, dark places or depths hold me back. It's about bouncing back from those times. Um, and you know, I feel like I'm a much better person for it. You know,
Yeah.
I don't ever encourage anyone to shy away from feeling those things. It's painful for sure. And nobody wants to feel pain,
Yeah.
but that is part of life. And you know, what you do with that is, you know, I think carrying so much greater reward later in life, especially as you grow as a parent or, you know, as you grow older and navigate other complicated situations, you know. Um, I'm grateful for those experiences.
It, are you willing to share one of those? You don't have to if you don't want to. It's just to give maybe a little bit more of a picture for the listeners of what you mean by low.
Yeah, I mean, look, it could come from you know, feeling like you're really on the right track with your career,
Yeah.
right? But then for whatever reason, you just hit this roadblock. And that can definitely that especially happens earlier on, right? Where you're just really trying to hustle and hustle and hustle and you think something's gonna you think that oh, you hit this milestone and this is gonna happen. And people are telling you that oh, once this thing happens, once you get that gig, Gene, you know, everything's gonna take off, right?
Yeah.
And then it doesn't.
Mm.
And you had all these hopes. You had all these dreams, even though I'm not somebody who really falls for that naturally, right? I'm more of the I don't know, I'll believe it when I see it. But
Yeah.
even for someone like me, you can get tripped up by, you know, people telling you, oh, what this is going to mean for you, or
Yeah.
whatever. It's kind of a classic Hollywood trope at this point. And then it doesn't happen, or, it doesn't happen the way that you expected it to.
Yeah.
And then that can really get you down. It can make you question, do I really want to do this? You
Yeah.
know,
Hmm.
I think any artist, anyone who has really stuck with it would have a similar story.
You know,
Um,
it's so interesting when you talk about this because I feel like so many interviews and internet spotlights is always talking about like this really successful, all the really successful stories. And so you think, wow, Hollywood must be so cool because you have all these people super good looking, super famous, super making all this money, making all these great movies. They seem really happy. Um, and then, once in a while, kind of like you mentioned, The Phantom Thread, I'm even thinking now of Maestro, which is a
oh
beautiful
yeah.
film.
Mhm.
Like their their lives are so hard. It's like you see the end result, this beautiful symphony or whatever,
Right.
and you're emotively drawn. You're like, wow, this is amazing. But then when you get to actually know the person, like nobody really gets to see the journey. You know what I mean? So it's
Right.
like, oh yeah, here I am. I just it does, but for most, it seems, you know, I think specifically for musicians I've heard it from, it's like this is really hard, and like you get to see this cool part at the end, but like the journey itself is not very glamorous at all.
It's not. It really isn't. That's a great way to put it. You sort of, you saying you see the end result and you think, oh my goodness, how amazing is that? You might see the composer on the end credits, and you say, wow, that's so cool. Like you
Yeah.
must, feel amazing or whatever. You're really on your way. But it's not that simple.
Yeah.
And by the time that your name does end up on the credit or whatever, you're long past it. You're moving on to the next thing, oftentimes. And um, and with music, especially these days, and how easily accessible it is, I think it is often taken for granted what it takes to make a piece of music. When you think about Cabrini here, I mean, there was a full orchestra. These are dozens of people who are playing on this thing, that they didn't just show up and magically play it. It required massive planning, budgeting, administering, you know, teamwork, very fine details to make sure that things could be done on time. The list goes on that has nothing to do with the actual creation of it, which is hard enough on its own.
Yeah.
So when you really look behind, the curtains, it is a very arduous, really hard thing to do. And I think most people don't quite realize just how much is involved with creating a piece of music, let alone a film score. Like you
Yeah.
said, you just hear the end. And it's
Mm.
just like, oh, that sounds really, really nice. But oh, you wouldn't believe what it took to get there. You
Yeah.
you you would think we're all crazy for doing any of this, man.
Well, Gene, I want to respectful your time, so I just have one more question. If
Yeah.
you could pick a piece of music to describe who you are, it could be something you've written or something you've heard. It could have vocals, it could have no vocals. What song captures who you are as a person, you think the best?
Woof, that's a good one. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before.
You know,
I love so
put
many.
it put it in your
Yeah.
in your thing because it's a great opener for it. Just ask somebody and they'll be like, "Whoa." It'll be a good conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna remember this one. That's a really great question, Danielle. I love so many different kinds of music. It's not just classical or, film scores. I love pop and weird electronic stuff and, you name it, country. So it's when I try to think of a piece that always makes me feel something deep, and especially when it comes to feelings of love and longing and imagination. Um, there's this beautiful piece called Ark of Doves,
Hmm.
which is by Brian Eno, and the pianist who's on that album. The name is I'm blanking on the name. Um, but it's an instrumental piece. There's no words, but it is just so gorgeous and emotional and free.
Oh, I
There's
gotta
no
look.
like verse. Yeah, Ark of Doves. Um, that's one of my favorite pieces. I also uh, love If I Ain't Got You, by Alicia Keys.
Yeah.
I it's such a great song because it really is like, there's so much nonsense in the world. There's so much pettiness. There's so much just noise. And sometimes when you have the people that you really love around you, that is all that matters. And that song just nails it for me, in representing my worldview. We You don't need the diamond rings, the roses, or whatever, that's all just nothing.
Yeah.
Just nothing, you know. So those are definitely two songs off the top of my head.
Well, Jean, thank you so much. And it's been so great to talk with you and just being vulnerable yourself about your struggles and also the things you love and are passionate about music, which keep you going. But for listeners, you'll all have a link to his website. Check out the other films he's scored for, and if you haven't listened to the Cabrini score, you really need to because it's beautiful. It's a very emotive. It's its own story without even seeing the film. So, but Jean, thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure getting to meet you.
Thank you, Danielle. It was such a pleasure talking with you.